matter how much we love our heroes, they're nothing without a good murderous villain haunting their paths. Maybe that's why it's so difficult for long-running shows to get them right. Fortunately, Netflix's Castlevania has no such problem, as the vampire hunting saga is chock full of memorable antagonists that'll make your skin crawl. Thus, in today's marvelous video, we'll be playing tribute to all our favorite villains from the series by listing our top 22 villains from the show to see who's the most evil of them all. However, before we move ahead with all the villainous stuff, please take a moment to be a hero and hit the like and subscribe buttons. It might just be a small click for you, but to us it means an awful lot. Now it's time to put on your mean face, because here we go. Dracula! Now, Dracula definitely doesn't need an introduction. I mean, the guy has been haunting our collective imaginations for more than a century now, and we couldn't be more grateful. Though this legendary monster has seen numerous iterations over the years, Castlevania still succeeds in doing the impossible by crafting a thoroughly nightmarish and original version of the Count. Dracula features as the main antagonist of Castlevania in the first 2 seasons of the Netflix show and is depicted more as a terrifying force of nature than a monster. He's clearly the strongest of vampire kind in this saga, and possesses such sheer hatred for humanity that you begin to feel threatened even when you're just looking at him through a screen. In the world of Castlevania, Dracula Vlad Tepes is a bloodthirsty tyrant who is known for impaling his victims and slaughtering entire villages when someone goes against his will. Though this isn't a good starting point for his character by any means, it only keeps getting worse. For centuries, Dracula lived like a recluse in his magical teleporting castle in the European nation of Wallachia, collecting vast reserves of wealth and knowledge. However, one day, a doctor named Lisa approached him to learn more about science, and the dreadful monster somehow developed a soft corner for the woman. The duo fell in love and gave birth to a son named Adrian, who later grew into the fearsome warrior named Alucard. Under his wife's influence, Dracula begins to feel some semblance of empathy for the humans, but this happy period in the vampire's life quickly comes to an end. One day, Dracula discovered that Lisa had been burnt at the stake by the church under accusations of witchcraft, and as you can expect, he completely lost it. Dracula proclaimed war on humanity in the year 1475 and didn't stop until all of Wallachia had been reduced to a complete hellscape. However, his vengeance wasn't immediate, as he gave the people of the town about a year to make their peace with God before he began unleashing his army from hell. When Dracula's son Alucard tried to convince his father against this senseless culling of the innocent, Dracula fought his own blood to prove that there were no innocents in his eyes. A year later, when Dracula unleashed his army, the town of Targoviste was quick to fall. Soon, the hordes descended upon the rest of Wallachia as well, and this is where the story of Castlevania truly begins. Dracula is undoubtedly the most powerful vampire we've seen in the show. In addition to his vampiric physiology, he also has complete command of the Night Horde, along with an understanding of magic that far surpasses any other character on the show. Moreover, Dracula is a true genius who can easily maneuver even the most powerful of humans with ease. No wonder all our heroes had to get together to stop this outrageously powerful guy. Elizabeth Bathory, goddess form. Well, Elizabeth from Castlevania Nocturne definitely has to be the second entry on this list, as the Queen of Vampires is truly something special. Elizabeth was the secondary antagonist of the show for the first 2 seasons and is driven by the singular goal of bringing an eternal night into existence, which will allow vampire kind to roam freely wherever they see fit. This is a genuinely horrifying proposition, which is made even worse by the fact that Elizabeth is so powerful that she believes she is the reincarnation of the ancient Egyptian goddess of war, Sekhmet. Bathory's journey began in Hungary, where she was proclaimed mad for calling herself a messiah. In 1614, she was sentenced to a lifetime of isolation after being held responsible for the deaths of hundreds upon hundreds of women and children. Unlike Dracula, Bathory had always been a psychopathic narcissist who had always been capable of unimaginable cruelty, even when she was a human. Things only got worse when the vampire Drolta Twentes secretly visited Bathory in prison and turned her into a vampire with ungodly powers. Every day for a century, Bathory would continue to drink Sekhmet's blood, allowing her to absorb the goddess's power. Due to this, she gained recognition as the queen of all vampires, and people even began to see her as sort of a vampire messiah. During this period, Elizabeth would continually conquer lands and kill countless humans in order to plunge the world into perpetual darkness. Her terrifying plans involved halting the solar eclipse in Lace so that the moon would always block the sun. After consuming Sekhmet's blood and inheriting her powers, Bathory descended into full-blown megalomania that further enhanced her desire to cause misery. She possesses a slew of remarkable abilities due to her vampiric physiology, which allows her to wipe out entire armies with ease. After channeling the powers contained in Sekhmet's soul, Bathory can also use old magic to manipulate darkness and shadows on a catastrophic scale. Additionally, she also has handy little tricks like telekinesis and pyrokinesis, which makes her a pretty terrible opponent for even the most fearsome of warriors. Death! Death, or the Grim Reaper, is one of the most intriguing characters in the entire Castlevania series. It's an eternal entity that tricks Saint Germain by disguising itself as Varney and the Alchemist in order to bring Dracula back from the dead. After all, it was one of the first to join Dracula's court and willfully volunteered to eliminate all the humans during Dracula's first assault on Targo Viste. It's an elemental being that feeds on the essence of living beings, and thus Dracula's plans are pretty useful to him. After Saint Germain was trapped in the Infinite Corridor, Death took on the form of an anonymous alchemist and lured the poor guy by meeting him where he was to meet his beloved. He then manipulated Germain by telling him that the only way to control the corridor was by giving up something of value. This was basically the beginning of Death's ploy to bring back Dracula, as this evil entity takes genuine pleasure in consuming souls. Death literally has no moral limits, and there's no horrifying act that it won't commit to get what it wants. Since Death had never eaten so well as it had during Dracula's genocide, it became hellbent on reviving Dracula so that he would murder the world and feed all of life to Death. Just thinking about the guy makes us kind of afraid, to be honest. Death is also incredibly powerful, as it is nigh immortal and has more strength than any other character in the series. Even the unbearably cocky Trevor Belmont admitted that he wouldn't survive a battle with Death. In addition to its strength, Death is also a master manipulator who can shapeshift into any form in order to get under its victim's skin. We've become sort of uneasy just talking about this evil entity, so let's keep moving. Vauxblanc. Vauxblanc is an old and wealthy vampire who owns a sugar plantation in Saint-Domingue. He's the pure embodiment of the evil brought about by slavery and is one of those characters that you can't help but hate. By 1780, he had already gained hold of the sugar plantation, which he maintained through slavery. Due to this, everyone born within his domains automatically became his personal property, and he made sure that they never had a moment to rest. He even branded his slaves to make them easier to identify and managed to build an incredibly successful business from their painful labor. He's also an extremely superstitious individual who forbids all sorts of charms, dances, and songs on his plantation. He's so afraid of magic that he immediately kills Annette's mother when the woman performs a simple voodoo charm. Though he's not particularly powerful, he still has considerable skill in hand-to-hand combat and can even transform into a bat, which makes it easier for him to flee battlefield. Saint Germain. Now, Count Saint Germain is kind of unique because he didn't start out to become a villain. He possesses no malice towards other humans and isn't a psychopath by any means. Still, he's responsible for some of the most unfortunate events in the entire series, and all of this springs from the unending grief that was brought on by the loss of his partner. We first meet Saint Germain in Lindenfield, where he was seeking to study books from the Priory. However, we would soon learn that this was all a front to hide his true identity, as Germain was actually a wizard who specialized in alchemy. The man possesses knowledge that many would consider to be heretical and eccentric, and he might even be an immortal from an entirely different space and time. Germain's greatest motivation is his relentless desire to reunite with the love of his life, whom he lost in the Infinite Corridor. And this is how he ended up in Lindenfeld, as the Priory was essentially a portal to the corridor where he lost his lover. Germain also has an innate talent for alchemy and aims to realize the ultimate alchemical goal of creating a rebus, which is a perfect being formed by two people who have gone through both death and rebirth. Germain honestly believes his goal to be so pure that it might save the world. However, Saint Germain suffers from PTSD and is haunted by nightmares of the corridor. Death began exploiting Saint Germain's vulnerabilities in the form of an alchemist and assured him that there was a way that could simultaneously reunite him with his lover, control the Infinite Corridor, and even create the rebus. But to accomplish these dreams, Saint Germain would have to let go of his morality, and he begins to go down a terrible path. Over time, we see him kill and manipulate others to get his desires, and he's even willing to work with vampires. But still, the man does have a conscience, and he uses the last shreds of his strength to save Trevor after seeing the error of his ways. But I guess you could still call him a villain. Saint Germain stands as one of the most talented alchemists in all of history, and also has a very effective understanding of magic. Though he's not the most powerful in combat, his fierce intelligence still provides him with an edge over his opponents. Olrox. Olrox is an ancient Aztec vampire who's probably the most shrewd guy we've ever seen. A native of the American lands, he's a sophisticated and elegant monster with an insatiable thirst for blood. Olrox is actually a pretty old vampire who was presumably turned during the late 15th to 16th century. He's known to be a survivor of the Aztec genocide brought about by Spanish conquistadors and was forced to travel all over the globe for the next several centuries. During these travels, he faced numerous vampire hunters, all of whom fell before his might. Sometime during the 28th century, Olrox fell in love with a Mohican man living in Britain's North American colonies, but the eternal romance didn't last as long as Olrox had hoped, as his lover was killed by the hunter Julia Belmont. Of course, this sent Olrox down a path of revenge, and one night in the 1780s, he managed to track Julia down in Massachusetts. This was just after the conclusion of the American Revolution, and he managed to corner Julia and her son Richter at the docks where they were about to board a ship to France. A brutal battle ensued, and in the end, Olrox managed to win by transforming into a giant serpentine dragon. Surprisingly, Olrox let the young Richter go, but promised that he would kill him sometime in the future. About a decade later, in 1792, Olrox traveled to France after being summoned to attend the arrival and ascension of Countess Erzsébet Bathory. Though we've seen numerous vampires over the course of the series, Olrox is an exceptionally powerful one, and he can transform into numerous forms via magic, like the serpentine dragon or Quetzalcoatl that we mentioned earlier. He can also transform into a mist and is capable of summoning ghostly skulls that are enveloped in blue flames. Olrox is undoubtedly one of those guys that you just don't want to cross. Hector. Despite Dracula's scathing hatred for humans, the man does know how to pick his soldiers. Just take a look at Hector, one of the two human generals in Dracula's army who also happens to be a master forge master who can bring animals and humans back from the dead with just a few strokes of his hammer. He can also call demons from hell to occupy corpses in order to create creatures that can then be enlisted into Dracula's army based on Hector's intent. Though Hector is human himself, he does share Dracula's resentment towards humans due to his rough childhood. After all, this guy was exposed to the worst side of humanity ever since he was born. His mother wished that he never existed, while his father happened to be a particularly selfish alchemist. In the end, Hector ended up burning his entire house with his parents inside of it. He completely shunned all human contact and started living a solitary life in Rhodes, Greece, where he was found by Dracula after the vampire heard about him from local scholars. Hector became Dracula's chief forge master and was called into action after Lisa's death to create an army composed of the creatures of the night. After Dracula's war against humans, Carmilla gains Hector's trust and convinces him to join her coup against Dracula by convincing him that Dracula is insane. Hector was actually one of the most instrumental factors in the eventual defeat of Dracula's army. Hector is an extremely powerful magician who has an intricate knowledge of the craft. He uses a talisman that's created by focusing his will on one object, and he can also erect force fields by way of fenced posts. However, Hector's most impressive skill has to be his command over necromancy, which he can use to bring the dead back to life. He considers these ungodly creatures to be fully alive, and he seems to possess a natural talent for them. He can also forge devils from corpses whose eyes glow an intimidating shade of blue instead of red.
I see.
Isaac. Isaac is the other human general serving in Dracula's armies. He was introduced to us as a complete antagonist, but over time we saw him turn into something of a protagonist. Still, he surely deserves a mention on this list. Isaac's childhood was pretty difficult as he was born as a slave under a ruthless master who liked lashing the poor guy. With time, Isaac began studying his master's books, but was discovered on one such occasion. Though Isaac was genuinely trying to help his master, the guy lashed out at him pretty badly, which led Isaac to his breaking point. Enraged beyond reason, Isaac murdered his master, and this incident filled Isaac with boundless hatred against all humans. During his journey, he encountered some of the worst kinds of men, including brigand magicians who wanted to sell the poor guy's body parts. Fortunately, Dracula resisted Isaac just in time, and he ended up joining the vampire's vengeful quest against humanity. Though Isaac had an incredibly harsh childhood, he persevered and managed to travel across Africa and the Middle East as a child. During this period, he managed to gain extensive knowledge of magic through renegade occultist books and ended up becoming one of the strongest forge masters we've ever seen. Though Isaac can be extremely cruel at times, he still believes in unconditional loyalty and love towards his masters, but only if his master reciprocates in equal measure. As an ardent misanthrope, he holds a special resentment towards the petty cruelties of man, but still shows appreciation for the kind deeds of humans who help him. As a forge master, Isaac has great mastery of different forms of magic, but it's necromancy that deserves special mention. Just like his colleague Hector, Isaac can bring creatures back to life and perform resurrections. humans. Interestingly, the corpses he brings back often seem to scream in pain when undergoing the process. Just like Hector, Isaac also has the power to create night creatures from corpses in order to do his bidding, but he uses a dagger instead of a hammer. Through years of experience, Isaac has also grown into an expert combatant who can hold his own against even the toughest of foes and seems to have a special penchant for knives. Though he is a villain, Isaac deserves some sympathy for all he's endured at the hands of humans. Carmilla. Our next entry is another ridiculously powerful vampire, the Queen of Styrium, Carmilla. A scheming noblewoman, she's the kind of person who wouldn't think twice before stabbing someone in the back. She was a former ally of Dracula, but eventually organized a coup to usurp control of the vampires. We first see Carmilla when she arrives at Dracula's castle with the rest of his generals, but it's pretty evident that she has her own hidden agendas. Carmilla was never really on board with Dracula's plans for mankind's extinction, as this would leave the vampire population without any source of blood. We don't know much about Carmilla's past, but it is believed that she was turned into a vampire many centuries ago by an ancient vampire lord. Carmilla perfectly fits the archetype of femme fatale, as she often leverages her sexuality to manipulate others. She's an extremely selfish individual and will go to any extent to accomplish her goals. This makes her extremely adept at politics, and the fact that she's able to fool all of Dracula's council members is a testament to her skill. Her thirst for violence is unparalleled, and she sees all of mankind as nothing more than livestock. Carmilla is also a highly trained combatant with superhuman physical attributes. As a prideful and arrogant leader, she would sooner die than give up. Thus, she's also mastered a form of self-destruction through which she can burst into an inferno of violet flame after stabbing herself with her curved blade. You might win against her in the fight, but it's still doubtful whether or not you'd even survive. Dragon. Dragon is a seasoned warrior who definitely has a far greater story than what was depicted in the animated series. Still, this warmongering vampire has managed to make quite an impression. Dragon was infamous for carrying out hundreds of ambushes and slaying thousands of people on his path of conquest. Dragon wields considerable influence over the vampire population and is able to take over the leadership role after Dracula and his generals are defeated. We saw him in action during the siege against Dracula's castle and Alucard's village, where he led a vast vampire army. Interestingly, the soldiers of this army wore an assortment of armor belonging to numerous cultures such as Japanese, Indian, and European. Many of the remaining soldiers of Dracula's army also joined Dragon's army after the Count's defeat. He also has 4 vampire magicians among his soldiers who seek to create the body vessel for Rebus in order to assist Saint Germain. As a vampire general, Dragon is highly adept at all forms of combat and can also fly owing to the bat-like wings on his back. Drolta Tuentes. Drolta is the main antagonist of Castlevania Nocturne's first and second seasons and is known for her extremely sadistic nature. She's an ancient and powerful being whose ultimate goal is to facilitate the ascension of Vampire Messiah in the form of Countess Erzsébet Bathory. Before Drolta's transition to a vampire, she used to be the high priestess of the Egyptian goddess of war, Sekhmet. In 1199 CE, Drolta's temple was raided by bandits and she found herself helpless in the face of the invaders defiling her temple. His attempts to stop the invaders were pointless and she was knocked out in the skirmish. When she came to, all her friends had been slaughtered and the body of Sekhmet had been stolen. She also spotted a vampire feeding on the lifeless body of a worshipper and, in a bout of rage, managed to kill the monster. Then she drank the vampire's blood, wishing to become stronger. Her prayers were answered as she turned into a powerful vampire, and over the next couple of decades, Drolta sired a bunch more bloodsuckers and initiated her into the cult of Sekhmet. She began feeding the blood of the goddess to whomever she deemed a worthy vessel, but no one was able to make Sekhmet live again. Finally, she wandered out into the world and found Bathory in the year 1614. Impressed by her depravity, she turned Bathory into a vampire and fed her the goddess's blood. Somehow, she succeeded in her quest, and Bathory ended up becoming a true avatar of the goddess. As one of Bathory's oldest companions, she has assisted her in countless acts that are too heinous to mention. Drolta's thirst for power is second to none, and she is truly a sadistic genius who's completely intolerant of the ones who won't recognize Bathory as their goddess. Drolta has a slew of amazing abilities, including a succubus form, in which she gains fiery pink hair, a large pair of bat wings, a demonic tail, big black horns, and pitch black thorns. Her wings are especially dangerous as she can slice through wood and stone with ease. In addition to these physical powers, Drolta is also pretty good at electrokinesis, which she can use to enhance her velocity drastically. Believe us when we tell you, you won't even see her coming. Striga. Striga, the High General of Styria, is one of those warriors who could single-handedly change the fate of an entire battle. She also happens to be one of the 4 queens of the nation and sits on the Council of Sisters, which makes her one of the most influential individuals in the realm. Not much is known about her past, apart from the fact that she has a traumatic history that haunts her to this day. She is an honest and blunt individual who prefers physical conflict to political strategies. She works closely with her lover, Morana, and together, they keep the kingdom running. She has the soul of a warrior, and thus her sense of honor remains strong even in the worst of circumstances. Her tactical genius was instrumental in bringing Dracula and his army down. Though she certainly has some noble qualities, she still despises humans, just like her sisters. To Striga, humans are just food for bags that need to be put into concentration to ensure a steady supply of blood for the vampires. Striga is probably the strongest hand-to-hand combatant in the Styrian army, and her physical prowess far exceeds that of the average vampire. In battle, she usually dons her day armor and wields an enormous sword that can slice through multiple humans in a single swing. Ratko. Ratko is an extremely skilled vampire who's been waging war for a couple of centuries. He's extremely skilled at both fighting and killing, which is why he considers himself a war expert. Ratko is an ally of Varney, who is one of death's many forms and seeks to resurrect Dracula. Ratko is a firm believer in the fact that the objective of war is to kill so many opponents that they can no longer hope to fight. Thus, his tactics tend to be so vicious and brutal that most people would consider them war crimes. He's revered as one of the most prolific killers on the planet and takes pleasure in killing his opponents, especially humans. Despite his talents, Ratko ranks kind of low in the vampire hierarchy and often finds himself working for witty vampire lords who are inferior to him in terms of talent. Through years of combat experience, Ratko has gained a powerful set of skills that make him one of the greatest vampire soldiers we've seen so far. Though Ratko doesn't have any magical powers, he can still fly using a pair of bat-like wings that protrude from his back. The Abbot Emmanuel. The Church has never been the most trustworthy organization in Castlevania, and this malicious abbot is probably the greatest example of the evil these godmen are capable of. As the highest clergyman in the French town of Machaku, the abbot wields a great amount of influence among the townsfolk and the aristocracy. He has a firm belief in his own idea of the greater good and won't hesitate to commit even the worst of crimes in order to perpetuate his power. So far, we've been focusing on a bunch of evil vampires and magicians, but Emmanuel shows us the pure villainy that humans are capable of. When Emmanuel was first introduced to us, he seemed to be something of a protagonist, but eventually we came to see that this was all a ruse. Emmanuel is a member of the Order of St. John based out of Malta and is fully aware of the danger posed to the church by the revolution in France. Though he's posing as a peacekeeper and a pillar of the community when we first see him, he desperately seeks to preserve his own interests and power. This desire becomes the key reason for his turn towards fanaticism, and honestly, that's way more scary than the damn vampires. To further his interests, he switched sides and joined the vampire messiah, Bathory, who insisted that the abbot sacrifice someone dear to him to prove his loyalty. The guy almost sacrificed his daughter Maria on the altar in order to achieve this, and that might just be the most despicable act on this entire despicable list. Though Emmanuel is not extravagantly powerful, he still has a bit of talent as a forge master and uses an Enochian spellbook to channel souls from hell. Tara Renard. Tara is a former Russian speaker who was forced to flee from her native land due to constant persecution at the hands of military groups that had begun enlisting vampires. Tara's speaker group was constantly targeted by Bathory back in Russia until they were all massacred by the vampires. Though Tara survived, most of her family had already been slaughtered by the time she arrived in Bathory's dungeon. Moreover, her younger sister had been turned into a vampire, and Tara killed her sister in order to save her from a worse fate before finding her way to France. Here, she fell in love with the abbot and gave birth to Maria in the commune of Machaku. She was also the one who took in Richter after the passing of his mother. For the longest time, we saw Tara as a reliable and compassionate figure who would go to any lengths to protect her family. However, at the end of Season 1, Tara was turned into a vampire by Bathory. After this, she became a completely different person who was much more somber and quiet. Though she's not as senselessly violent as the other creatures of the night, Tara still feels an insatiable thirst for blood and is not averse to killing for it. Despite this, Tara's desire to protect her family still lingers within her heart, and it would be interesting to see how it manifests in the future. Sekhmet. Sekhmet is the Egyptian goddess of war, vengeance, and healing, as well as plagues in the desert. So yeah, that's a whole lot of things to be responsible for, and that's exactly what makes Sekhmet so damn powerful. She's the daughter of the sun god Ra and ranks among the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. She's said to be the manifestation of Ra's vengeance and power, which makes her extremely powerful. Legend states that Sekhmet could breathe fire and cause plagues. However, she's also capable of warding off diseases and healing the sick. Many centuries ago, Sekhmet ruled over Egypt in a fair and just manner. She was betrayed by humans, and this led to her death. After her demise, Sekhmet's soul was split into 3 parts: Ba, her body; Ka, her blood; and Ak, her soul. Ba and Ka were left behind on the mortal plane, while Ak was sent off into the spirit world. During this time, Sekhmet's body was placed under the care of the last Egyptian priests, including Drolta Tuentes, who happened to be the high priestess at the time. After a raid by a group of bandits, Sekhmet's body was stolen, but her blood remained. Drolta would eventually use Sekhmet's blood to create the vampire messiah in the form of Erzsébet Bathory. Though Sekhmet was once a kind and compassionate goddess, she became resentful towards mankind after their betrayal led to her earthly demise. Though she reserves some compassion for humans, her powers are used for increasingly heinous acts by Erzsébet Bathory. Nikolai! Nikolai is one of Drolta's personal guards, and he's known for his ferocious strength and combat prowess. He has extensive experience on the battlefield and has been Drolta's companion for many, many years now. A somber and serious individual, he's the kind of guy who rarely opens up to others. However, whenever he finds the opportunity, he tends to get extremely talkative about his conquests and victories. He might just be one of the most sadistic soldiers we've ever seen, which makes him the perfect fit for Tuentes. He genuinely enjoys the misery of others and can be seen smiling through even the most brutal battles. He finds a special kind of joy in torturing others both physically and mentally, especially if his victims are human. The large brand on his face also shows us that the guy is a true masochist, as it's not normal for someone to take that kind of pain voluntarily. The brand is so large that it completely covers one of his eyes, but it's unknown whether he lost the eye in battle or intentionally let it get burnt while being branded. Nikolai is particularly intimidating because of his exceptional strength and resilience, which surpasses that of most vampires. He's a skilled melee combatant and wields an axe in battle. Mizrak! Mizrak is one of the warrior monks belonging to the Knights of Saint, a militant group that was assembled by the abbot in order to preserve the town. We first saw him standing guard outside the abbey when Maria and Richter approached the abbot. He's a fiercely religious man who struggles with his fate due to his repressed homosexuality. Though he tried to hold on to his religion for the longest time, he eventually gave in to his desires by striking up a relationship with Olrox. Eventually, Olrox even transforms Mizrak into a vampire, which makes this warrior more dangerous than ever before. Though he has no magical abilities, Mizrak is still seen as a seasoned warrior who's more than capable of taking care of himself in battle. Marquis! Marquis is a famous aristocrat who owns the Vendée Chateau in the west of France. He's revered as a pillar of the community among the locals, but many terrible secrets are hidden behind his noble facade. As a vampire noble, he possesses excellent diplomatic skills and is adept in political trickery. Though he likes to come across as a calm and composed individual, he often loses his composure in his free time and adopts a more easygoing attitude. This man perfectly embodies the power wielded by the aristocrats in Castlevania Nocturne. Lenore! At first glance, Lenore might seem to be the most reasonable among her compatriots. She serves as the diplomat of the Council of Sisters and is well versed in all sorts of political and diplomatic scenarios. As a human, Lenore used to be a child of war, and by the age of 5, she had already witnessed enough conflict to kill her innocence. She has also implied that she used to be a noblewoman of high status whose parents were murdered by English soldiers. As the diplomat of the group, Lenore is pretty good at building trust, but don't be fooled, she's just as cunning as the rest of her sisters. She often tends to use trickery and underhanded tactics to get the results she wants, and is not averse to manipulating and gaslighting others. This is perfectly exemplified when she seduces Hector and turns him into her slave. This allowed her to recruit his help to build an army of night creatures, which was crucial for the sisters' plans. Though she might seem compassionate, all Lenore is looking for is a pet, as she thinks people like Hector cannot handle living on their own without someone controlling them. Her twisted worldview makes her one of the most dangerous antagonists in the series, even though she's not particularly powerful on a physical level. She possesses all the typical attributes of a vampire and is also capable of transforming her body into a swarm of bats, which allows her to move rapidly. She can also transform herself into a mist that allows her to phase through obstacles like prison bars with ease. Godbrand! Godbrand, the Loud Viking, was one of Dracula's most trusted generals. Like most Vikings, he had a penchant for killing, hunting, sex, and, well, turning humans into boats. A brutal and ruthless warrior, he commands the respect of other vampires and can be excessive when asserting authority. Though he's brash and headstrong, he's not averse to bowing down in front of those with greater power and only lives up to his delusions of grandeur when hunting humans. He was pretty excited about participating in Dracula's war against humans, as he saw it as a way to reorganize the human race as unthinking livestock. In battle, Godbrand wields a sword and an axe, but his true power comes from his unparalleled agility, physical strength, and speed. Morana! Morana is one of the most intriguing members of the Council of Sisters, which rules Styria. As chief administrator and organizer of the nation, she's responsible whenever Carmilla is away. She's described as a particularly cruel vampire by Lenore and is never averse to using torture as a means to get what she wants. She's been Striga's lover for a very long time, and together, the duo was responsible for much of the kingdom's administration. They have a pretty interesting dynamic, one where Striga is making military plans while Morana supports her with supply lines and resources. Morana's ultimate goal is to build an empire that has endless supplies of blood, as there's no line she wouldn't cross to get what she wants. Just like her sisters, she has no compassion for humanity and sees them as nothing more than food. However, she acknowledges mankind's ability, adaptability, and intelligence. Morana's talent lies in her skill as an accountant, as she can single-handedly manage the entirety of Styria. Marvelous verdict! The villains in Castlevania perfectly depict the utter depravity that humans are capable of. Though most of these characters are vampires, many of their behavioral traits have often been seen in humans throughout history. It's strange how many of these villains were created by the cruelty of others, but then turned to their own forms of cruelty while seeking vengeance. Maybe all we need to do is break the cycle, but it won't be easy. Unfortunately, that's all we got for you for now, but do let us know whether we missed out on your favorite villain in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all our most marvelous content. Goodbye for now, but we'll catch you in the next one real soon.